Imagine yourself transported into the prehistoric marshes of Brazil. A thick, low-hanging fog clings to the tall grasses, while the air feels heavy, humid, and unsettlingly still. Birds have ceased their singing, and the drone of insects has vanished entirely. There is only that oppressive, stagnant silence, the kind that warns every living thing for miles that danger is lurking. Before a single sound reaches your ears, the sensation hits you, the earth beneath your boots begins to shudder. An immense presence is approaching. Suddenly, out of the mist, it emerges, a creature barreling forward with the unstoppable force of a derailed locomotive. This is no ordinary jaguar. In fact, it towers 5 times larger than any big cat you've ever seen. Nearly 900 pounds of pure, lethal muscle sprints with a speed that defies everything we know about physics for an animal of that magnitude. It slams into a young, armored herbivore, throwing the beast off balance and pinning it into the muddy ground. Using forelimbs as powerful as those of a professional heavyweight boxer, the cat then opens its massive jaws, driving 7-inch fangs directly into its prey's throat. Meet Smilodon populator, the most massive saber-toothed cat to ever roam this planet. And rest assured, this is merely the opening act. Welcome to South America during the Ice Age, a place where every preconceived notion you have about nature was dialed up to 11. Imagine a land where sloths stood as tall as a 2-story residence, and where armored beasts comparable in size to a Volkswagen navigated the plains, dragging heavy, 100-pound defensive tails behind them. Here, the predators were pulled straight from a nightmare, and even the plant eaters possessed the capacity to kill you instantly. But here is the detail that will surely haunt your dreams, the real enigma. It is a puzzle we are going to fully unravel before this video concludes. Every single one of these titans has vanished. An entire kingdom of massive creatures was wiped from existence in what can only be described as a fleeting moment. No meteor caused their ruin. No cataclysmic volcanic eruption. They simply disappeared. And the primary culprit behind their extinction might just be us. Today, this region of Brazil is known as the Pantanal. It stands as the largest tropical wetland on Earth, a sprawling, water-drenched paradise where caimans lounge on muddy banks. Thousands of capybaras graze, and jaguars maneuver through the reeds like phantoms. This location remains one of the final true strongholds for wildlife. Yet, if you were to rewind the clock 20,000 years, this landscape would be entirely unrecognizable during the height of the Ice Age. A vastly different world existed. It was characterized by drier, harsher conditions and far more expansive terrain. Great, undulating savannas stretched toward the horizon, punctuated by sparse scrub and tall grasses, a landscape perfectly suited for massive herds to roam. It resembled the open plains of Africa far more than the swampy, flooded Pantanal you see today. And the creatures this land cultivated were unlike anything found on the planet now. To grasp how such a reality could exist, you must comprehend a singular, remarkable truth regarding South America. For tens of millions of years, this continent existed as a solitary island. Picture it, a colossal landmass drifting in isolation through the eons, completely severed from all other territories. No land bridges, no terrestrial connections, just endless, surrounding ocean for as far as the eye could see. And when a place is quarantined from the rest of the world for that long, what happens? Evolution ceases to follow conventional patterns. It begins to experiment, venturing off on its own eccentric paths without any external competition or interference. South America became a personal laboratory for Mother Nature. Over millions of years, she utilized it to engineer some of the most bizarre, majestic, and awe-inspiring beings to ever take a breath. So, how is a world like that visualized? The simplest method I know is this: consider the natural world you are currently familiar with. There are grazers on the open range, browsers foraging in the trees, ambush predators lying in wait within the shadows, and scavengers clearing away the remnants left behind. Every one of these roles existed back then, too. The sole difference is that every animal occupying those niches was magnified to monstrous proportions. So, take the world you know in your bones and imagine it photocopied at 300% scale. Let me be absolutely clear about one thing: none of this is a fairy tale. None of it is a product of someone's overactive imagination. These giants were real. And we know this because we have unearthed their remains with our own hands. From caves, sinkholes, and ancient, desiccated riverbeds all across this region of Brazil. Their bones have been pulled, their skulls have been held, and their claws have been measured. This was reality, every detail of it, yet this isolated, peculiar, and protected island sanctuary was destined to end. A massive invasion was on the horizon, a tectonic shift that would crash into this continent and alter its trajectory for all time. We shall explore that intrusion shortly. However, let us first acquaint ourselves with the local inhabitants. We begin with the biological equivalents of battle tanks. Most people, when envisioning creatures of the deep past, immediately conjure images of razor-sharp fangs and jagged claws. They focus on the predators, and please, do not fret, we will certainly get to the hunters. They are every bit as horrifying as you might imagine. But here is a fact that may catch you off guard, the most astonishing. Mind-bending animals of this lost era never consumed so much as a morsel of flesh. They were entirely herbivorous, despite a landscape crawling with saber-toothed cats. These giants managed to survive. They didn't achieve this through speed or ferocity. Rather, they transformed their very anatomy into mobile fortresses. Allow me to introduce the Glyptodon. Visualize a Volkswagen Beetle. Have you got the image in your mind? Now, imagine that vehicle is alive, finally. Picture a mad blacksmith arriving to weld a suit of plate armor directly onto its frame. That, in essence, describes the Glyptodon. It was a creature roughly the dimensions of a subcompact car, hulking low to the earth beneath an immense, domed carapace. That shell, I assure you, was no laughing matter, constructed from thousands of interlocking plates of solid bone. It was as tight as roof shingles or the rivets lining a battleship's hull. The entire structure sat atop the animal's back like an armored gun turret. Some of these shells were so durable that a rifle bullet could likely have been deflected by them. So, for a fleeting moment, place yourself in the paws of a starving predator. You stumble upon a fully grown Glyptodon grazing in the open meadow. What exactly could you do? There is no flesh to sink your teeth into. There is nowhere to latch on. The belly is protected. The throat is shielded. And there is no vulnerable point to be found. Just a low, blunt, armored dome sits there in the afternoon sun, calmly finishing its lunch, effectively daring you to waste your energy and shatter your own jaw. For the majority of hunters, the prudent decision was to pivot and pursue a more accessible meal. Yet, a relative of the Glyptodon pushed this defensive strategy to a whole new level. And this one, oh, you're going to be fascinated by this one. His name was Doedicurus. Doedicurus didn't simply arrive on the battlefield with armor. He brought a weapon, attached to the very tip of his tail. This animal wielded a club. It was a massive weighted, spiked cudgel forged from solid bone. And I'm not talking about some delicate accessory here. I am referring to a warhammer weighing up to 100 pounds, swung at the end of a thick, corded, muscular tail. Scientists grew quite curious about this appendage. So they sat down to crunch the data. The bones were studied, and the leverage and mechanics of the swing were calculated. Their findings? A Doedicurus could whip that tail around at roughly 25 miles per hour. When that club struck its target, it delivered raw force sufficient to snap bone like a dry twig. It was akin to a sledgehammer smashing through a drywall partition. And here is the most compelling aspect we have empirical evidence that these weapons were put to frequent use. Fossilized shells, dating back thousands of years, have been excavated with clear indentations still visible. Cracks, craters, and structural damage line the armor, matching the precise size and shape of another Doedicurus club. Reread that. Let the significance of it settle in. These creatures weren't merely fending off outside predators. They were beating the living daylights out of each other. Visualize the spectacle: two armored behemoths locked in a face-off on the open savanna, clashing over a mate. Around and around they pivot, swinging 100-pound spiked maces against one another's plating, much like medieval knights in heavy steel who refused to yield. The sound of bone striking bone would have rolled across the plains like distant rolling thunder. That, my friends, is a heavyweight prize fight worth the price of admission. So, let me pose a fair question to you. If the herbivores in this land were protected to this degree, armored like tanks and equipped like medieval knights, what on God's green earth could possibly hunt them down successfully? Hold on to that thought. The answer is the most terrifying feline to ever prowl the earth. We are approaching him with every passing second. But before he is introduced, we must look upward, far, far upward. Because in this lost world, not every giant kept its head close to the dirt. Behold the Eremotherium, the giant ground sloth. He just might be my favorite creature in this entire narrative. Now, the very first thing I need you to do is discard every preconceived notion you have about sloths. Forget the slow, sleepy little fellow hanging upside down from a rainforest branch, taking the better part of a week just to scratch his nose. That creature is real enough, I grant you. But his prehistoric ancestor was a vastly different beast. Eremotherium stood as large as a full-grown bull elephant, 20 feet long from snout to tail, comprising 3 or perhaps 4 tons of muscle, shaggy fur, and massive bone. When this creature reared up onto its hind limbs to feed, when it stood to its full height, to pull down the canopy of the trees, it loomed as high as a 2-story residence. Picture, if you will, a creature stretching 20 feet skyward, peering for all the world like a furry construction crane. Capping those massive front paws were formidable, curved claws, each one rivaling a carving knife in length. To be fair, these were merely implements. They served as giant hooks, ideal for snaring branches and hauling lush, tender foliage down to the beast's waiting mouth. At its core, the giant sloth was a tranquil animal, wanting nothing more from existence than to consume its greens in serene solitude. However, do not mistake such peacefulness for harmlessness. Should a predator draw too close or prove a bit too greedy, a single swipe from a beast of that stature could shatter a skull with the ease of crushing an empty beer can in one's palm. Even Smilodon, the undisputed sovereign of that era, knew better than to crowd the giant ground sloth. These towering heavyweights, moreover, were far from solitary. Consider the Toxodon a real brain teaser. If you will, visualize the barrel-chested, heavy build of a hippopotamus, then graft the blunt, horned visage of a rhinoceros onto its front end. That is your Toxodon, upon first unearthing its remains. Scientists were so utterly baffled that they could barely reach a consensus regarding what sort of beast they had discovered. It was truly unparalleled, found nowhere else on the globe but within this specific territory. Then there was Macrauchenia, perhaps the most bizarre specimen of them all. Picture a camel roughly the size of a horse, but equipped with a long, flexible snout reminiscent of an elephant's fledgling trunk. Large, anxious herds of these creatures roamed the plains, and as we shall shortly observe, they sat comfortably atop the menu for a particular ravenous saber-toothed cat. Finally, we encounter the Gomphotheres, South America's indigenous elephants. These massive tusked behemoths would swing their trunks and topple trees, tearing through the undergrowth like a demolition crew clearing a vacant lot before nightfall. Now, I want you to ruminate on this for a moment. Creatures of such immense scale do not merely inhabit a landscape. They engineer it. They flatten entire forests and carve out trails wide enough for a pickup truck to navigate. By carrying seeds in their stomachs across vast distances, they acted as the continent's gardeners, scattering life as they roamed. These giants functioned as the world's resident bulldozers, and horticulturists rolled into one. Do keep that fact tucked away. Remember the daily impact these massive herbivores had on the terrain. The day is inevitably approaching when these giants will vanish, and the land itself will undergo a fundamental transformation in their absence. Store that thought in your back pocket. It will prove significant before our journey concludes. For now, however, the giants maintained their reign. Every kingdom of titans requires a monarch upon the throne. Consequently, it is finally time to encounter the killers. Every ecosystem harbors an apex predator, a singular terror that every other inhabitant has learned to fear in its very marrow. It is that shadow which causes an entire herd to lift its head simultaneously and freeze in total silence. In the Ice Age of South America, that monster held a specific name, one we have referenced once or twice this evening. It is high time we take a closer, proper look at Smilodon populator. Naturally, you are familiar with the saber-toothed tiger. You have encountered it in films and the cartoons your grandchildren enjoy on Saturday mornings. Yet, here is the detail. No one ever reveals the saber-tooth you have envisioned your entire life was merely the smaller cousin. The famous one recovered by the truckload from the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles. That is a distinct species. Smilodon fatalis. Do not misunderstand me. It was a large, lethal cat in its own right, weighing in at 300 or 400 pounds. Roughly the size of a hefty modern tiger. It is certainly not a creature one would want to encounter on a dark, lonely night. Down here in South America, however, evolution was not interested in creating a mere contender. It forged the heavyweight champion of the world. Smilodon populator was more massive, heavier, and significantly more ferocious, with the largest specimens scaling in at nearly 900 pounds. Place one alongside a full-grown African lion, and that lion suddenly appears no more imposing than a house cat. Without a shadow of a doubt, this was the largest saber-toothed cat to ever exist in any era. Period. Case closed. Now, this is where the narrative becomes truly fascinating, because almost everyone holds a massive misconception regarding the next part. One might assume that an animal sporting 7-inch fangs would simply clamp down and crush through solid bone, as if it were a wood chipper dismantling a tree branch. It seems logical, does it not? Well, that is incorrect. Here is the great secret regarding those iconic fangs. While they were indeed impressively and terrifyingly long, they were also surprisingly thin, almost fragile, if you can believe it. Had the ancient Smilodon bitten down onto solid bone with such force, the fangs could have snapped clean off. Let me assure you, a saber-toothed cat with a broken saber is a doomed animal. It would perish from starvation within the month. Consequently, Smilodon did not engage in combat like a drunken brawler throwing desperate haymakers, hoping for a lucky strike. No, it fought like a consummate professional, a cold, patient, calculated assassin. Examine the front end of this creature, those shoulders, those massive forearms. The cat was built like an elite powerlifter, with every ounce of its strength concentrated in its upper body, built for a prolonged chase across the open plains. It was not lacking the necessary legs for such work. The cat understood its limitations. Instead, Smilodon was an ambush predator, pure and simple. It was the sudden explosion erupting from the tall grass at the exact moment you least expected it. The kill proceeded thusly. It would close the final gap in a single heartbeat, slamming into the target with the full force of its immense front-end musculature. Then, wrapping those massive arms completely around the prey. It would wrestle the animal, drag it down, twist it, and force it flat onto the ground, stripping away its legs, its balance, and every remaining option to fight or flee. Only when the quarry was rendered defenseless, pinned down, and utterly immobilized would the final strike occur. A single bite. Just one. Surgical precision was applied, targeting the soft tissue of the throat with pinpoint accuracy. Everything concluded in an instant. Lights out. This was no brawling slugger, blindly throwing haymakers. Instead, think of a cold-blooded hitman who aligned a solitary shot, took it, and never missed his mark. One might assume a feline of that caliber possessed no rivals, that the entire world was owned by him. Clear and undisputed. For the most part, that assumption holds true, yet there existed one beast to whom even the mighty Smilodon had to defer. And here is the kicker. This creature didn't even bother with the hunt. It had no need to. Allow me to introduce Arctotherium, the giant short-faced bear. It holds the title of the largest bear to have ever roamed this planet, bar none. I invite you to truly contemplate the sheer magnitude of this animal. Should Arctotherium have risen onto its hind legs to survey the landscape, it would have stared down at you from an elevation of 11 feet. The largest individuals may have tipped the scales at nearly 1.5 tons. A fully mature Alaskan grizzly, the sort of animal that induces cold sweats in seasoned hunters at midnight, would have appeared as nothing more than a small cub standing within the shadow of this behemoth. While scientists continue to debate the specific dietary habits of Arctotherium, the candid truth is that it likely wasn't a dedicated hunter in the same vein as Smilodon. Like many gargantuan bears, it probably consumed whatever it could get its paws upon: roots, berries, and foliage, alongside plenty of meat scavenged from fresh carcasses. But keep this mental image in your mind. Our 900-pound Smilodon assassin, the most lethal cat in history, has finally executed a perfect kill following an exhausting, grueling pursuit. He has earned his reward, exhausted. He settles in to gorge himself. Suddenly, the earth begins to tremble. Emerging from the tree line, the largest bear in global history comes sauntering forward, nose held high, marching toward that fresh kill as if he owns it. What then is the mighty Saber-Toothed king to do? Stand his ground? Debate the point? Absolutely not. He will abandon his hard-won feast, slink away, and yield every last scrap to the big fellow. In this realm, the apex predator isn't always the one that secures the kill. Sometimes it is simply the one too massive to challenge. There you have the full roster of this lost world armored tanks traversing the plains, 2-story sloths reaching into the canopy, the deadliest cat in Earth's history, and the largest bear to ever draw breath. An entire continent was absolutely teeming with monsters, each locked into a savage, perpetual arms race. The predators became increasingly lethal, and the prey grew progressively tougher. Decade after decade, for hundreds of thousands of years. It was a brutal, spectacular world. And in its own bloody, beautiful fashion, it was destined to be completely upturned by an invading army marching from the north. Remember, for tens of millions of years, South America existed in total seclusion, an island continent tightly sealed from the global community. Its giants evolved in private, behind closed doors, with no external challengers to contest their supremacy. Then, the planet executed a truly extraordinary maneuver. Near the site of modern-day Panama, the Earth shifted. Volcanic activity stirred deep beneath the waves, pushing the seabed upward inch by inch over an immense epoch. Dry land began to emerge from the open sea, where previously only ocean had existed. Gradually, ever so slowly, a land bridge was formed, a narrow neck of solid ground, stitching together two continents that had been complete strangers for eons. North and South America were finally united, the moment that passage was completed. The floodgates swung open. Scientists employ a neat, respectable term for the ensuing period, the Great American Interchange. It sounds quite polite, does it not? Like a highway junction or a trade deal. Do not let that sophisticated label deceive you for a second. What actually transpired was one of the most dramatic invasions in the history of life on this planet. From the north, newcomers poured southward saber-toothed cats, giant bears, horse herds, mastodons, and their tusked cousins. The Gomphotheres we encountered earlier. A marching army streamed across that new land bridge into a continent that had never witnessed such beings. However, here is the detail most people conveniently forget: it was not a one-way street. While the northerners marched south, the South American natives packed up and migrated northward in return. Giant ground sloths migrated into North America, as did the armored Glyptodons, hauling their heavy domes and war club tails behind them. In fact, and I love this particular detail, we have recovered bones of Eremotherium, our 20-foot giant sloth, as far north as the Carolinas. Let that image circulate in your mind: a giant Brazilian ground sloth rearing 20 feet on its hind legs, lumbering through the woods of what would eventually become the American South. Long before the Carolinas existed, long before any observer was around to witness it, this was a head-on collision of two entire worlds, two separate sets of monsters, each evolved in complete isolation. Suddenly cast into the same arena, they were locked in a fierce tooth and claw struggle over every inch of territory, competing for the same sustenance and hunting the same quarry. Situated right at the heart of this turmoil was this very corner of Brazil, our future Pantanal. It served as a massive continental crossroads, where the northern invaders met the indigenous southern giants, face to face and eye to eye. To this day, the sprawling drama of that era can still be read by us, inscribed into the earth through the remains buried beneath the soil. And here is the fascinating part: for many millennia, this coexistence actually functioned. Giants from two disparate worlds somehow managed to share one continent. It was the most significant congregation of colossal land animals the Americas have ever witnessed, all living, all present, all in the identical location at the same time. Then, within the span of just a few thousand years, nearly every single one of them perished. We have arrived at the climax. This is the monumental inquiry regarding which I made a solemn vow at the very inception of our tale. Who pulled the trigger? For the better part of a century, scientists have been locked in heated debate over this mystery. And believe me, they are still arguing hammer and tongs today. What transpired to these titans was no gradual, gentle decline across millions of peaceful years. It was a total massacre in what serves as a single geological heartbeat, roughly 12,000 years ago. These giants simply vanished from the face of the earth. The saber-tooth, the giant bear, the two-story ground sloth, the armored tanks, and the camel with the trunk, all of them. Every last one gone. Let us, therefore, treat this for what it truly is: a cold case. It is a murder mystery on a continental scale, with the victims long buried, the trail gone stone cold for 12 millennia, and only two primary suspects left in the room. Let us haul both in and place them under the hot lights. Suspect number one: the climate. The Ice Age finally reached its conclusion approximately 12,000 years ago, and the entire planet underwent a warming phase. As the world heated up, everything began to shift in many regions. The wide open savannas, the rolling grasslands upon which the giants relied for every meal, began to fill in. Forests crept in where open plains had previously stretched, with dense, dark, tangled woods encroaching from every direction. The real struggle of being a 4-ton animal lies in this: a creature of that mass must consume a staggering quantity of food daily to keep its massive body operational. Think of it as a giant engine. The larger the engine, the more fuel it must burn merely to idle. When the grasslands that fueled those engines were snatched away, the engines began to sputter, stall, and finally shut down for good. Now, recall the detail I urged you to store in your back pocket back when we first encountered the gentle herbivores. Remember how those very giants actively engineered that open landscape, trampling the brush, grazing the grass low, and knocking over saplings before they could establish themselves. Here is where the situation comes full circle, as the giants perished. No one was left to keep the encroaching forests at bay. Consequently, the land grew wilder, thicker, and more tangled with each passing year, which in turn choked out even more of the remaining giants. It was a vicious cycle, a trap that fueled itself until the noose was pulled shut. The climate has a motive, and it has the opportunity. It appears to be an open and shut case, does it not? But wait, hold on for one moment. Suspect number 2 has just entered the room. And let me tell you, he is a real piece of work. Suspect number 2 is us, around 14,000 years ago, and potentially even earlier, the first human beings, migrated into South America. Brother, they did not arrive empty-handed. They brought with them spears tipped with a lethal, cutting-edge technology, a masterfully crafted, razor-sharp stone head known as the fishtail point. It was a genuine masterpiece of ancient stonework. The most chilling detail is this: everywhere we unearth these spear points, we discover something else lying right beside them, butchered remains. We find the skeletons of the giants themselves, which have been cut, scraped, hacked, and cracked open by human hands to reach the marrow inside. Pause for a moment and reflect on how bizarre, how almost impossible this seems. A human being weighs, what, 150 pounds soaking wet, without claws to speak of, lacking fangs, armor, shells, or thick, leathery hides. This creature was squishy, slow, and soft by a country mile. The least imposing animal on the entire battlefield, yet armed with nothing but a sharpened stick and a cunning, calculated, scheming mind, this little biped managed to overcome every obstacle. Against overwhelming odds, 4-ton armored tanks were brought down. The uncatchable were hunted. The unkillable were outmaneuvered. The impossible was achieved, time and time again. When the map is laid out tracking the human migration, the spread of those lethal spear points, and the sites where the giants winked out of existence, the correlation is nearly perfect. Behind the humans as they fanned across the continent, one species after another blinked out. It is as if a man were walking down a long, darkened hallway, clicking off the light switches one by one. What, then, is the verdict? Who truly ended the giants? For a significant period, most researchers preferred a balanced approach. Labeling it a 1-2 punch, they proposed that a shifting climate weakened the titans, starving them while human hunters arrived to finish the task. It was, as they say, a case of terrible luck and atrocious timing, both converging at the same fateful historical moment, however. This is where the narrative becomes uncomfortable for us as we continue to dig, extracting more bones from the earth and scrutinizing the evidence across South America. The finger is pointed ever more sharply back at our own species. A growing number of experts now contend that the spears were the primary driver, with the changing climate acting merely as gasoline thrown onto the fire. A kingdom of titans that had reigned for millions of years was brought to its knees by 150-pound creatures wielding nothing but sharp rocks and innovative ideas. To be perfectly honest, though, the case remains open. The debate continues to rage within lecture halls and excavation sites globally. In just a moment, I am going to hand this entire case file over to you, allowing you to serve as both judge and jury. Most curious of all, when you really contemplate it, is the realization that this lost world of giants never fully vanished. It left ghosts behind small, living shadows of the magnificent beings that once roamed these lands. Consider that jaguar, the very one we began with, gliding silently through today's Pantanal reeds, as the most powerful and largest cat in the Americas. He is an undeniably beautiful and formidable specimen. Yet, had he stood in the shadow of the mighty Smilodon, he would have appeared as nothing more than a tame house kitten. Observe the capybara, lounging contentedly on the riverbank, the world's largest rodent. Roughly the size of a family dog, it is merely a remnant. A humble survivor paddling through the ruins of a world that once overflowed with giants. When you survey the wildlife of modern South America, I want you to grasp this. You are not witnessing the main event. You are observing the scrappy, small bit players who were lucky, quick, or perhaps just ordinary enough to remain standing when the final curtain descended upon the rest. Perhaps that is the profound lesson buried in this story. Mother Nature confers no medals for size. She is entirely indifferent to the thickness of your armor, the length of your fangs, or the height you can reach to graze the treetops. The giants possessed all of these attributes and more. Yet in the end, it was insufficient to save a single one of them. The survivors of today were not the fiercest, the largest, or the best armed. They were simply the ones capable of change. The case file is now in your hands, and I am stepping aside. Who was the true trigger man behind the most massive extinction this continent has witnessed? Was it the dying grass and the shifting climate, or were our own ancestors and their sharp stone-tipped spears responsible? You are the jury now. Navigate down to the comments, present your case, and lay the entire argument out for me. Your verdict is genuinely important, and I make sure to read every single submission. If you enjoyed tonight's journey into this lost world, please do an old storyteller a small favor. Smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell, because our next destination is even older and stranger. Believe me, you will not want to miss it. I will see you there.